Hello and welcome back! Today I thought I would delve into the process for a piece for the Pumpkin Cells Real Estate just a little bit more than I have before. Jumping right in, we have the sketching process. You might have noticed that I traced a photo of hands. Those were my hands. My little tiny weak hands. Because there was no way I was gonna fight with his hands for that long. Because as I've heard it said many times, just because you know how to draw something doesn't mean you should waste your time trying to do it. Sometimes using an asset is just the easiest way to do it, and I do that a lot with the Pumpkin Cells Real Estate. You'll see me use a photo of the maquette that I made of Lantrell's head, and I trace that for pretty much every time his head appears in the comic now, just because I can draw his head, but it turns out better and it just is quicker to use the maquette. So make assets, use them, there's no shame in tracing. But, you know, of course, do so responsibly, use stuff you legally can use if you're doing commercial work. With the line art, I've made a modified version of the default 6B brush in Procreate, and I use that for pretty much all of the in-comic line art. There's bigger versions of it that I also use, but I have made a very small one that has very high opacity so that I don't have to press very hard, which is another thing that I've done to try to make the comic easier to make with how my arms are. I use the straight line tool for the background a lot, and for tiny little details, I have such a small brush that I don't even really have to shrink it down or anything. Things like Yumi's eyebrows, I do often use a larger version of the 6B brush, but I have multiple alternates of it that have the opacity really dialed up so that it's much easier to get the dark lines. There's the maquette head that I mentioned, and as I said, I use that pretty much every time I draw his head in the comic now. I always make sure to do shading on the head just to add more dimension in the eye well, nose, and mouth. And then I move on to the colors, which I primarily use a modified version of the default Procreate wash brush for things such as the blacks on Yumi's apron and hair and such, and then I go over it with a brush that I've mentioned before on the channel, but has since been delisted as far as I can tell, but here's the creator of it. I'll pop that up on screen there, and I use that brush for pretty much everything else. For some lighting effects, I will use the gouache brush, and sometimes a brush to blend things out. To really get fine details though, I tend to use the ink bleed brush as an eraser, and I overcolor and then erase. The brush that I use has a decently low opacity, so I tend to do a lot of layers to get the color payoff that I want and to add the shading, which pretty much all of the colors for the comic are done on 2 layers. A background layer and then a layer for character colors. Here I'm going in with a brush. I believe I'm using the gouache brush at a low opacity, and I'm using an add mode layer to add some extra lighting in blue and also in orange, just to get some extra definition going on. I primarily use a normal mode layer for color and then add for all the lighting. But that's the process, so thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Take care and God bless. If you have any more questions, drop them down below and I'll try to address them.